Geek. Talking baseball every week. Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the Push Begins edition. I'm John Bonus of TwitsDaily.com. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
Don't forget John Bonus of a TikTok as well. John just showed me.
We just had a long conversation about TikTok. Aaron is fascinated now by TikTok and videos.
Yeah, I would say that I'm fascinated because I'm an old man who doesn't really know what TikTok is, except John's older and is now considerably older. Not mentally, but just
considerably older.
Yeah, by carbon dating.
Yeah.
And he showed me he's been doing TikToks about the Twins. You guys should go follow him on there, I guess. I don't know if I can really advise that, but why not? And he's getting like 25,000 views on it, and I'm like, what? I thought he was going to say like, I got the 92 views. I said, how many are you getting on there? I was ready to make fun of him. He goes, the last one got 24,000. I'm like, what? And just
you thought I'd added a couple digits.
You know how like sometimes something hits you and you just didn't even think it was in the realm of possibility? Mm-hmm. That's what that was.
Yes.
Like if he would have said 2,400, I'd have been like, wow, that's like,
really good. Yeah, right.
24,000, like you big fat liar. What's the real number? Anyway.
Maybe TikTok's lying to me. It's possible TikTok is lying to me. Who knows where those views
lying
come
all
from.
the way to the bank.
Yeah, well, that's right.
We're here to talk about the Minnesota Twins. And coming out of the All-Star break, they resume play late night tonight on the West Coast against the powerhouse Oakland Athletics, one of the hottest teams in the league.
Yes.
Actually, they have been playing better, slightly, or less bad.
We should have played them in April
Horrible
and May,
ground.
for sure.
You're right.
They would have been better.
So we thought about how we wanted to kind of treat this All-Star break show.
Yeah, because basically, since last time we talked on this free podcast,
right, they got swept by the
Orioles. We did get a interview with Derek Falvey, which was kind of something we will mention a little bit.
Yeah,
but not a lot else has happened, and we only want to dwell on the Orioles sweep so much.
Right. I was like, should we talk about the thing that happened a week ago that was bad? I mean, maybe. I'm not trying to avoid talking about it, but we did talk about it Monday on the Patreon.
Right, yes.
The draft has happened since then, which we'll touch on briefly here. But I will say, if you are a hardcore draft person, of which I'm sure there are many listening to this, we did about a half hour, maybe more, breakdown of not only Walker Jenkins, but the whole kind of approach to the draft and the first 3 picks and all that stuff.
Correct.
On Monday.
All the drama surrounding. There was a fair amount of drama surrounding it.
So we'll give you the Cliffs Notes version of that on this show. But if you're into that, Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. A lot of, if you want more detailed stuff, timely stuff, that's the way to go.
Good time to join in part because, we're going to be diving even deeper into trade deadline talk during the Patreons. There's no question about that. And then also because if there's an emergency podcast, you will be able to download it.
Trade season's our season.
Yeah, this is the time. There's two great times to join. 2 times a lot of people like to join the Patreon.
The off season.
The off season, I would say the off season, the big signings in the off season.
Yeah, like winter meetings time.
Right, that's right. And then the trade deadline one. And then, theoretically, there's a third. That would be the postseason.
What's that now? That's after the season? What happens with that? Is that the thing where they play 3 games and then end their season?
You do usually 2.
2, yeah. It used to be 3. Yeah, now it's 2. Yeah. Okay. I have some memory of that. But, but instead of recapping that and recapping the first half, we thought we'd kind of use this as a little bit of almost like a reset. So what we're going to hopefully, you'll see at the end of this if we follow through with this. Who knows? I didn't expect to spend an hour talking about TikToks at the beginning, but I'm fascinated. To talk about kind of where they stand with 71 games remaining. They've played 91 out of 71 games. They're 45-46, half game out of first place. Kind of where they stand, what the bar for a successful second half would look like, what their actual odds here, and then as that, kind of playing off that, going into 16, 17 days from now is the trade
2 weeks
deadline.
from Tuesday is the trade deadline.
2.5 weeks basically is the trade deadline. And so we want to sort of set the table for that. And then like John said, we'll dive a lot deeper into, they need a reliever. Which relievers should they go after?
Here's the top 10 relievers we think they're going to be pursuing, or
that'll probably be a Patreon thing. So this is more big picture, which I think this year especially is doubly interesting to me because the addition of a third wild card in each league, as we talked about before, has really kind of muddied the waters in terms of who's a buyer and who's a seller, at least as of right now.
Yes.
Now, I don't know that 2 more weeks is really going to separate that, but it's going to have to.
That's right.
And then beyond that,
there is a lot more procrastinating going on amongst the front offices in Major League Baseball
Falvey
right now.
talked to us about Sunday, which we'll get into in a second. But then beyond that, the Twins' position specifically, not that they're kind of debating whether to be buyers or sellers. They're going to be either buyers or neutral, I would say, pretty clearly. But how much to buy or how aggressively to buy. But then even more interesting to me is, what exactly are they trying to buy, or should they be trying to buy? And I know it's very simple and just
usually just been starting pitching.
Right, for 20 years or 50 years. And they don't really need that now.
Right.
And even beyond that, you could say, well, they just need more hitting.
Right.
And it's like, well, yes, definitely. Agreed. Where would you like those hitters to play?
Right.
And that gets tricky. There isn't really a straightforward answer to that.
Yes.
So we're going to try to kind of make sense of that situation too. But first,
I'll give a third reason why it's interesting. Because they swung big and missed last year.
Right.
Both parts of that are interesting to me. First of all, they swung big. There is not. Listen, we're going to put the name show. We're going to talk about Shohei Ohtani at some point in the next 2.5 weeks, and we all know it's a crazy idea that he would end up on the Twins for a 2-month rental. Everybody understands that. But over the last year, they have gone heavily. That made a couple of big moves at the trade deadline last year, and they went out and signed Carlos Correa in the offseason. My point is that this front office is not afraid. Now, I'm not saying I'm not saying that there's any more than a 5%, 3% chance of Shohei Ohtani ending up even that much, right? No. But the point is that it's not outlandish that they are at least talking about something like that.
Well, I think it's outlandish. I mean, let's not compare Tyler Mahle to Shohei Ohtani. I agree, they were aggressive last year by their standards, but they weren't even. I mean, we ranked them like the 3rd or 4th most aggressive team at last year.
Right. No, you're right. We did end up with.
It's kind of like the payroll. Right. Yeah. Their payroll is big by their standards. It's kind of average-ish by overall standards.
Enough.
But yes, your overall point, I mean, nobody expected them to sign Correa. Nobody expected them to re-sign Correa. There's been some other moves that have been.
This front office has not been afraid to take big swings.
But there's big swings and there's big swings. But first, the basics of this team, if you've been listening to the show or if you've never and you've just been watching, is pretty obvious. They pitch real good and they hit real bad.
Yes. Right.
Okay, that's done. We can.
That's right. Yep.
That's how do you get to 45 and 46 in the most frustrating way possible? Have one half of your team be exceptional.
Right.
They rank 2nd in the American League in ERA, and they were 1st until last Sunday. My article's up today about that.
Is it?
John's laughing because I think I told that on the Patreon.
You did talk about that on
allowing
the Patreon.
15 runs can ruin their league best ERA, and the entire premise of my article, forcing me to rewrite the bulk of it. But it's out today. I don't know if it's better. I don't know if it's worse, but it's the effing thing is published, so that's all I care about. But they have the 2nd best ERA in the American League, 3rd best in all of baseball, behind Houston and Atlanta, which are 2 powerhouse teams. They're narrowly ahead of Tampa Bay, which is another powerhouse team. They've certainly had, I would say, a top 3 pitching staff.
Right.
Well, how do you have a 500 record with the top 3 pitching staff? Well, you have a bottom 3 or bottom 5, let's say, offense.
Right. Yeah.
And, it's funny that in baseball, everyone agrees and everyone knows inherently that hitting and pitching are fully separate, and we talk about them differently, and we'll often say they need pitching, they need hitting, instead of just they need to improve, all that stuff. It does get treated differently in terms of the overall impact than like football. No one would ever say, how can this team only be 9-8? I had to adjust because the NFL 17 games.
Yes, you did. Yeah. I would not have made that adjustment.
How can this team only be 9-8 or 8-9? They have the number 4 offense in football. Well, you'd say, well, how bad's their defense? Oh, it's number 27. Yeah. They go, well, that makes sense. You could score a lot. You can't stop the other team from scoring. And I even feel like in the NBA, you can make more sense of that. Like, oh, this team is just, they put up 120 every night.
Yeah.
But for some reason in baseball, I think in part because it's almost like more separate because the functions involved are so different and the players involved are completely different. And what I mean by that is like in basketball,
right,
a team that scores a lot but is terrible defensively, the same guys who are scoring a lot are the ones who are bad defensively. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't.
Right.
Now,
Yes.
I know football is completely different.
Right.
So it's a little bit. I don't know why football people seem to be able to separate more. But, ultimately, it's not. I guess it's not surprising that a team that has a top 5 pitching staff and a bottom 5 lineup is 500. Except it feels strange because
Right.
I guess maybe the Twins haven't experienced, they certainly haven't experienced this exact version of it, which is great pitching and bad hitting. They just haven't had great pitching almost ever. And when they have had great pitching, or borderline great pitching back in the Santana days, the offense was, functional.
He had Maurer and Morneau in the middle of that lineup.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And, going back further into the 70s and 60s, they had some actual good lineups. They had some really good pitching staff. That's why they made the World Series and they won divisions and stuff. And so, but with that said, I don't think it's like confusing necessarily that they're 500 in the very extreme way. One half of the team's really good, one half. I think that, but I do think it's like that's almost custom built for frustration. I think it's the second most frustrating way to have a 500 team. The first being a horrible bullpen. Everything else is pretty good.
That's fair.
And then the bullpen's the worst,
Yes.
which we saw at times last year, and that was really frustrating. Because then it's like you play 8 innings or 7 innings of really good, and then it just gets all,
Yep.
it all vanishes. But I think this is the
I
second.
live with a Phillies fan, so I know this well.
Right,
I can assure you that is the most
This
frustrating
to me
way.
is the second most frustrating way, and there's a bunch of different ways. You could be bad defensively, you could be, whatever it is, which is they consistently get really good starting pitching, both in terms of runs prevented and going deep into games. They lead, or I think they might lead the majors in innings per start still. They're either first or second. Right. And you just cannot put together 4 runs or 3 runs a lot of the time when that would win. And I think gets to the point where A, everyone hates the lineup, rightfully, but then B, it almost like it chips away at the perception of the pitching in a weird way, which is guys going 6 2/3 and allowing 3 runs don't even really get full credit for a good
I
solid.
can't believe he gave up that home run, that 2-run home run in the second
Exactly,
inning.
because there's just no margin for error. And you see that in the bullpen too. Like, oh my God, that reliever gave up a solo homer. Well, yeah, if you were up 5-2 when that happened, big deal. But if it's a tie game because you can't score. So anyway, but looking ahead, I think it's important, especially within the AL Central, which is an entirely different world than the rest of baseball. Both, spending wise.
NL Central isn't too far up.
I know people like to say that, but they got a significantly better
Both
record.
divisions have they have bet more wins losses. They have about the same in terms of run differential. In the AL Central, we've got one team with a positive run differential. In the NL Central, you got one team with a positive run differential.
Yes, I would. I'll give you 10 wins. I'll give you a plus 10 for the NL Central, and I'll take the AL Central as the worst division for the end of the year.
I'd have to take a look at that.
Okay, there's your offer. It expires 4 minutes. I don't want you to actually think about it because maybe I'm an idiot. But here's my point with that, which is as bad as the Twins have been offensively, Cleveland has been even worse. And as mediocre as the Twins have been, going 45 and 46, Cleveland is half a game better. They're identical.
Right. And with the right negative run differential.
Right, with a negative run differential. And here's the other thing that is worth considering. The Twins have the single easiest remaining strength of schedule. And all that is just adding up the records of their remaining opponents. Right. So if you play 6 games against Kansas City, you take Kansas City's record and you multiply it 6 times and you add it to the pile.
You're going strictly by their records this year's through 90-some games.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
They have the single easiest strength of schedule remaining in all of baseball. Cleveland is like middle of the pack-ish, like 16th, 17th or something like that, which is not a difficult schedule, but it's significantly different. And if you look within that, which I did this morning, so there are 7 teams out of 30 who have a winning percentage under 450. So those are like the legit, just straight up bad teams, 90 loss type of teams.
Right.
There's 7 of them. Kansas City, Oakland, Colorado, Washington, the White Sox, the Tigers, and St. Louis. Now, you'll notice 3 out of those 7 are in the AL Central.
Yes.
Against those 7 teams, the Twins play those 7 teams 28 times in their remaining 71 games. So they play the absolute, bottom 20% roughly of Major League Baseball 28 out of 71. So what's that? 40% of the time, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
There are also conveniently 7 teams out of 30 with a winning percentage above 550, which are the 90 plus
Really
win
good
teams. Atlanta, Tampa Bay, Baltimore, Miami, Dodgers, Rangers, Diamondbacks. They only play 13 games against those teams. So you play more than twice as many of the remaining 71. And then, so you add those together.
15% of your games versus the 20-some percent.
Right, because they're done playing the Yankees. They're done playing the Astros. They're done playing a fair number of the actual, consistently, this is a legit good team.
I mean, we've been saying that, right? We've been saying this. And
I think it's
the first
worth
half
laying
schedule
out.
Yes,
now,
I agree with you.
Does that make the Twins any more or less good? No. Does it make them any more or less likely to win a World Series if they get to the playoffs? No, but it does make them more likely to get to the playoffs. Right. And you can't win in the playoffs until you get to the playoffs. Should we be incredibly impressed if over the next several weeks when they're playing Kansas City and Oakland and whatever a million times that they have a pretty good record? No. But on the flip side, if they don't have a pretty good record against that, it's even worse than it looks.
Yeah, you can't be going 500 versus
right,
that.
exactly. Yeah. And then they have 6 games remaining against Cleveland, which is neither in neither of those groups because they're 500.
Right.
Exactly 500.
I was thinking about those Cleveland games. I mean, I'm glad in some ways. I'm glad there's only 6. But I guess that's an easy way to make up ground versus them. It's one of those things where if either team goes 5-1 versus the other,
it's going to be over.
It's going to be important.
Yeah,
it's going to be hard to make up those 4. Now, if 4-2, that's still important.
Right. I mean, we saw that in the late June series in Cleveland where they played 5 games because they were making up a washed out game, and the Twins they actually went 2-3. It was just all 3 losses were bullpen implosions, and then Wes Johnson left and all that. And we just saw kind of the lingering feeling from that of each one of those kind of counts double, basically. Right. And so you have 6 games remaining, 1 home series, 1 road series. Yes. They're each 3 against Cleveland. 1 is in late August, then there's a series in between, and then early September.
They have a stretch in late August and early September, about a 3-week stretch, where they're facing the Rangers twice, they're facing Cleveland twice, I think, and then they've got, I don't know, is Tampa Bay mixed in there, something like that as well? They've got one stretch there at the end of August, beginning of September, which is going to be important to be healthy for that stretch. Let's just put it that way.
Well, right, because if you're saying that they have the easiest remaining schedule, any stretch like that is almost by definition the only stretch like that.
Right.
You get through that in decent shape, and if you look at how they finished the season,
yes,
it's incredibly
once they get past that stretch, they end up. So here, that stretch starts on August 24th. 4 games versus Texas at home, right? 3 games versus Cleveland at home. And by the way, it starts with 2 versus Milwaukee on the road, which is also not great, right? Then 3 games versus Texas on the road, 3 games versus Cleveland on the road. So Texas, Cleveland, then the Mets, which they folded in. But then, 3 more versus Tampa Bay at home.
And then that's
and then that's through August 13th. And then August 14th and on, you've got Cincinnati in there, which doesn't seem as easy as it used to be.
True.
Right? But you've got White Sox, Cincinnati, the Angels, Oakland, and Colorado.
Right.
To
end... I think it's annoying for them to go to Colorado for a 3-game road trip to end the season, particularly because there is a Coors Field effect that can screw with teams physically. Yeah. So it kind of sucks to end the season there and then potentially start a playoff series because the altitude kind of plays tricks on you a little bit. But you could not draw up an easier home road to end the season than Oakland and then Colorado. Now, you'd rather play Colorado at home, obviously, because they're not that bad usually at Coors. But Colorado's terrible, and they're going to be even worse by that point. And Oakland is terrible and is not going to be any better.
Cincinnati might be in a pennant race at that point, so that could be a little tricky on the road. But we'll see.
So that's where they stand, and because of that, Fangraph. Here's the 3. I looked up Fangraphs, Baseball Prospectus, Baseball Reference, projections.
Okay. These are the playoff odds that you're talking about?
Yes, playoff odds.
Or division.
Which factor in how they perceive the quality of the teams, but then factors also the schedule, which plays a big part. Fangraphs has I'm only looking at winning the division. They have some marginal
Yes.
percentages to win the wild card, but I'm not stupid enough.
I mean,
to
right
think
now
that.
we're going to be talking a little bit later in the podcast about which teams are, going to be buyers and sellers.
Yeah.
I think you can make a pretty strong argument that the teams around them in the wild card race should be sellers.
Right. Yes, if the Twins were just shooting for a wild card, the Twins should
if
be
the
sellers.
division was out of range.
Right.
Okay.
Because my feeling about the wild card is this: if the Twins are in the wild card race, they'll win the division. Do you know what I mean? Like, if the Twins are playing well enough to be near the top of the wild card, they'll have won the division probably.
Right.
Sorry to Cleveland to hear that, but I mean, we'll see. I was proved wrong last year,
Right.
Although not really. Cleveland wasn't that great. It's just
but they went on a hell of a run in September.
Well, yeah, but it helped that they were beating the Twins a bunch of times.
Right.
So Fangraphs has them at 57% to win the division. Baseball Reference has them at 73% to win the division.
Wow.
And Baseball Prospectus has them at 60% to win the division. So, depending on how you want to trust, it's somewhere between 60 and 70%, let's say, to win the division. And so, the only reason I'm saying that is, A, to try to set kind of expectations, because everyone hates this team, it seems like. And I'm not saying it is frustrating to watch this team.
And the trend has certainly not been upward.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, those probably were 75 and 80% 3 weeks ago or something like that. I mean, I know they were. I used to check them. But I think it's worth noting, and this really gets hammered home to me with each visiting AL Central team that comes to Target Field, talking to their writers and talking to sometimes some of their staffers and a player or two once in a while, which is like all the complaints people have about the Twins exist with Cleveland, exist with the White Sox, and I'm sometimes even magnified, but because Twins fans and us even are so focused on the Twins, you kind of just assume the other situations can't possibly be this bad, right? You assume, my God, the Twins they're going to set the strikeout record. They can't score runs. Boy, it must be better in Cleveland. Oh, no, Cleveland scored 25 fewer runs than the Twins. So I think that it's worth just sort of setting expectations, but also kind of at least being fully aware of your surroundings, and how decrepit they are in the AL Central. Like the wallpaper is peeling.
Yes,
all the ceilings are dripping some sort of yellow liquid from them. You know what I mean? The carpets,
walls are bleeding.
Yeah, well, that's
Get out.
Yeah, it would. It turned it into a horror movie. By the way, don't get out because it's not going to be any better for you in another division. You want to stay in this haunted house for as long as you can. So. And then the only other thing there, so that has a direct impact, obviously, on the trade deadline, which we're going to really get into here in a second, which is, if you look at just outside of any context, a 45 and 46 team, we would be sitting here and we would be, first of all, their playoff odds would be like 10%, probably, something like that. If they were in the West or the East or just a neutral division, a normal division, they'd probably be 6 or 8 games back. I mean, they might be 10 or 15 games back, depending on which division. We'd be sitting here going, well, could they sneak into a wild card? Well, it's probably worth selling so-and-so and pending free agents, all that stuff. But because you need to be aware of your surroundings and because, this is worth fighting for in the sense that no one should be excited to win the 2023 American League Central. I'm not saying that. Like, you're going to hang the banner, but maybe the banner should have like a NC-17 warning on it or something. Like, don't look too close at this thing. But the payoff at the end is significant.
Right.
And it's more significant than ever because of the way they've structured the playoffs now in the new CBA. It's not, we won the world's crappiest division. Our reward is, going to Houston or going to Yankee Stadium and to just get their, doors blown off. The reward in this case is any division winner, no matter how bad, the worst division winner in each league is hosting a best-of-3 series, and not just hosting. You get all 3 games at home against the number 6 seed, which is the third and final wild card.
The last wild card team.
Right. Which, almost by definition, that's going to be like an 85 to 87 win team, maybe 88 win team, something like that. I mean, it's going to be the third-place team in the AL East or maybe the West, something like that. I mean, it's not going to be – now, that team maybe played exceptionally well in the second half.
Might be the fourth-place team in the AL East. No, you're right. Houston or Texas.
But some years it could be.
Right. Yes, that's right.
And so that is as big of a competitive advantage as a 500 mediocre team from a Horse S division is ever going to be able to get. You're playing 3 games all at home against the last of the playoff qualifiers, who might have a better record than you,
Right.
but they're still
Yes.
not good.
Right.
You get all 3 at home. You got to win 2 of them. You're going to get the extra revenue from that. You're going to get to hang out at home. You don't have to travel on the road. All that stuff. And so if your goal is to win the World Series, you cannot do that without making the playoffs. And even if your goal is smaller than that, and it's just win a GD playoff game, which is, I would think, a reasonable goal at this point, you will never get a better setup to win one effing playoff game than getting a 3-game series entirely at home against the number 6 seed out of 6. And if that's
with
not
one of the top pitching staffs in the,
that's a whole,
in the
yes.
league,
Yes.
right?
Well, that's another issue that we can talk about. You know, as frustrating as this type of team is to watch over 162 games, I do think this is the best version of a 500 team in terms of what it could mean in the playoffs.
Yes.
Because if you're going to have crappy pitching and a pretty good lineup, you're going to lose in the playoffs. But if you're going to have really good starting pitching, you can, I'm not saying they'd be a favorite or anything to win the World Series, but it's a better version of that. And so all I'm saying here is, I know there are going to be people out there who say, is this even worth giving up more prospects to bring in people? And that's all worth debating. You know, should they be sellers because they're not going anywhere? You don't know where they're going. There's been good teams that haven't gone anywhere. There's been bad teams that have gone plenty of places in the playoffs. You got to get there and see what happens. But beyond that, you know, it's fine to be like, the goal is winning the World Series, and this team does not seem equipped to win the World Series. Obviously. Agreed. But we've seen strange stuff happen. 1987, there isn't a single person ever at the time, or probably even midway through the playoffs, who thought this team's going to win the World Series. You got to get there first and then see what weird stuff happens.
Nobody thought they were going to knock off Detroit.
Right, obviously. Sure. But then beyond that, you got to at least win a playoff game. And until they win a playoff game, this fan base is rightfully so, I don't want to say checked out, but just, you know, who cares until this happens.
It does reduce the importance, the feel of the entire regular season.
And so my point would be, whether you're a great team and you're running away from the AL Central, whether you're a mediocre team and you're trying to race to 84 wins so you can beat out another mediocre team, getting to the playoffs is extraordinarily important for your big picture goal. And specifically, getting to the playoffs and setting yourself up with a best of 3 entirely at home against the third wild card is the best shot you're ever going to have to just win a damn playoff game. And to me, that is worth fighting for. And if it's not worth fighting for, what are we even doing? You know what I mean? Like, you have to at least cross that bridge at some point, or every year that you don't do that, people just care less and less about the regular season. And so that's kind of how I view, you know, the state of the Twins entering the trade deadline. I don't think this is a great team. I think they're a little bit better than a coin flip to win the AL Central because of the schedule. I wouldn't expect them to even be favored at home against a wild card team. But you're never going to get, more of a red carpet to a playoff win laid out than the scenario you would receive by winning this division. And so my response to that is, go try to push and win this division. I don't think you will ever regret that, you know, in a meaningful way. Obviously, you don't want to make bad trades like they did last year. So before we get into,
I'll give you one more, but I'll do it after we catch our sponsor, which is HelloFresh. I have got a order from HelloFresh coming on Wednesday. It is the family stuff, which we enjoy. We tried a bunch of them. We tried the Fit. We tried the Fit has too much rice in it. Chrissy's not a rice person.
Oh,
so a lot of them. I know.
Ironic. I'm the least fit person in the world, and I like rice. But with HelloFresh, you can choose kind of your menu each week.
That's right.
And you can customize it to some extent. And, you know, if you have kids, you can do a family menu, so they'll send you stuff that kids like. If you're just...
it's a great way to do a date with somebody. It's a great way to do a family date with your kids. Yeah. Because what happens is it all shows up in packages. Everything, you know, the frozen stuff's frozen. It's
all pre-portioned.
All pre-portioned. You might have to chop some things. You know, that's part of that's about it. And it's got a full recipe card with pictures,
step-by-step instructions,
right?
For even doofuses like me.
and it ends up looking fancy. It ends up tasting good.
It's very Instagrammable.
You can either get the ones that are really healthy or the ones that are not quite as healthy. Which
they have vegetarian options. They have meat-heavy options. All that stuff. And so if you want to give HelloFresh a try, you just go to HelloFresh.com/Gleeman50. That's Gleeman50. Use the code Gleeman50, and the reason it's 50 is you get 50% off, plus they'll give you free shipping on your first order. So that's HelloFresh.com/Gleeman50. Use the code Gleeman50 when you're checking out. That's America's #1 meal kit, HelloFresh.
That's right. And also, if you're just into snacking, you know anybody who's into snacking, Aaron Gleeman?
Unfortunately. Me and Barrero yesterday had a whole conversation once I was off the air about how neither of us are trying to eat past like 8:30 p.m. because we're old men and it crushes us for the next 5 days.
Right, yeah.
However, when you got stuff from nuts.com,
oh my goodness,
it's very tempting because
although some of it's very healthy.
That's
like,
true. You don't feel horrible.
Yeah, you can go either way with nuts.com. You can get the gummy bear, the chocolate covered gummy bears, right? Or you can get the cashews and the almonds. Right?
You got a little both.
Or you can go in between, which I think my favorite was like the bourbon soaked pecans or something. It was, oh my goodness.
You can get as decadent or as healthy as you want, basically, with nuts.com.
That's right.
And they're offering new customers a free gift with purchase, and they'll give you free shipping on orders of $29 or more. You just go to nuts.com/Gleeman. Check out all the delicious options at nuts.com/Gleeman. You'll receive a free gift and free shipping when you spend $29 or more. That's nuts.com/Gleeman.
Snack smart with nuts.com. All right. So my second point was going to be on that same question is, you can take again, I'll come back to the point I keep making, which does never seem to quite be true, which is the team we have now is not necessarily the team you're going to have in October.
I have that right here. At the board.
Right. And on your point of, you might as well go for it.
Yes.
Because you've got everything going for you.
Rebuilding is a sham.
Well, I'm totally with you on
general.
That. The other thing about that is that the advantage to having one of the worst offenses in the thing is that it doesn't take that much to get it better. Now,
true.
Alternately, it works the other way as well.
Sure.
That's the fear, is that the pitching is going to regress somewhat, right? Mm-hmm. But the truth is, you don't have to have that many things go right for this offense for it to be a much better offense.
Yeah, I mean, even an average offense,
right?
With this pitching
now,
staff,
none of them worked so far. Right. We're 4 months into this, and we still haven't found what those few things are that we need to fix. But you get one or two decent bats, you get a couple guys warming up, you get a guy or two healthy. It could be looking like a middle of the pack offense, and suddenly that is worth something in the playoffs. Right. So.
No changes have been made, obviously, coming out of the break. I'm assuming they won't be. I mean, they don't play till tonight, but I think they probably wouldn't have waited to announce that stuff. It's not my sense that anything's going to happen. We'll see. By the time you listen to this, things will either have or not happened. But I don't think that's a shock necessarily. I think people are frustrated by that, obviously, of all the talk of change and everything. Yeah. Agreed. I mean, we're past the point from a roster standpoint when I think we both agree we would have made changes already. I think there are people in the organization who feel the same way and have been sort of overruled.
I will suggest as well that with 2.5 weeks to the trade deadline, you might want to have a sense of if you can fix any of this stuff internally before you start venturing outside the organization. One of the things we're going to talk about when we get to the point where we're actually talking about all the different trade candidates out there is all the corner outfielders that are available. Right. And if that is something that you want to fix, you might want to see whether or not you have a fix in the organization. I agree
completely. And even just the bigger question of a left-handed bat, more specifically a left-handed corner outfielder, it's like if you're not even willing to part ways with Kepler or Gallo, both of whom have struggled all season, but especially Gallo since a good April. He's hitting 165 with a 44% strikeout rate, which is just absurd, obviously. And Kepler's in his third straight season of people getting excited every good week he has, but ultimately the numbers are just not there. If you're not even willing to push those guys aside for your homegrown first-round pick, good performing AAA guys, which is Wallner and Larnach too, who's now crushing at AAA. Well, then should we really be saying, they should try to add some corner outfield, a lefty bat? Because it's like, they won't even push those guys aside for options that they can get to the ballpark with no cost tomorrow.
Right.
And so it is
and the guys that you're picking, the guys that are going to be available at this trade deadline, are not, especially in the corner outfield spots, are not superstars. They're good, solid contributors. Some of them could be good, solid contributors, but they're not like, this is a no-brainer to add this guy to the lineup. So
yeah, it's confusing to me. I mean, I think they need to find a way to get more production from the outfield, and they're hamstrung because their best center fielder is their designated hitter, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And he's not really hitting anyway, so, Buxton. Their two corner outfielders, primary corner outfielders, are Gallo and Kepler, or some Willie Castro in there.
Right.
And none of them are hitting, really, for months now. I know Gallo's overall OPS plus is above average, but, I mean, come on. And how do you fix an outfield that has been among the worst in baseball at production across all three spots? It's going to be really difficult to find an impact center fielder on the trade market. I mean, it would be incredibly expensive, and I don't even know that there are really anybody who kind of fit that description who's going to be an upgrade over Taylor and all that. But you can almost always find just a corner bat, which is what makes the lack of production there so frustrating. Except you can go look at St. Paul and find a potential corner bat. And I know people are skeptical about rookies, and Larnach hasn't impressed, certainly. But Wallner deserves a chance, and I would argue, certainly compared to Kepler or Gallo, Larnach deserves another chance now that he's crushing AAA. But if you're unwilling to just even give those guys a chance, and you're unwilling to part ways with the underperforming veterans that you're paying roughly $20 million to for two players, well, then logically it seems a stretch that you would then go out and try to trade for a left-handed hitting outfielder and give up assets, unless maybe those assets are Larnach and Wallner, because you just don't trust them for whatever reason. But within that, a right-handed hitting corner bat would make all kinds of sense.
Yep.
And it would make sense whether you keep Kepler and Gallo or you ditch Kepler and Gallo for Wallner and Larnach, one or both of those things, because those are all four left-handed hitters.
I'm glad we're off on this little tangent here.
Yes, no matter who your primary corner outfielders are, whether it's the underperforming veterans or the two guys you could replace them with internally, they all could be paired with a right-handed hitting corner outfielder. And it's also funny to me that I think, we'll go over this, but maybe you disagree, but at the beginning of the offseason, we kind of laid out, I remember like 4 or 5 boxes that they need to check. One of which was like shortstop. Yeah. Well, they checked that with Correa. One of which was catcher. They checked that with Vasquez. Now, I'm not saying these moves have worked out well, but for the most part, they checked the boxes that were kind of obvious to everyone. Depth, for instance, was another one. The two boxes that they didn't check and that we were kind of dumbfounded by, which is easy to do because we're dumb, but were set up bullpen right-hander.
Yep.
Kind of just one more veteran, Michael Fulmer, we talked about a lot, obviously, but just that type of guy. No, not a world beater, not a $10 million a year guy, just a guy on a 1-year, $6 million deal that you can put in the 7th inning and add depth to the bullpen. Well, they never did that, and I still think they need that. But then the one that was really odd to me was right-handed hitting corner outfielder / first baseman.
Right.
And
what are the two things that we're going to say that they need at the trade deadline?
Those exact same two things. It's funny how that works, right? The two things they needed in November and January and March are still the two things that are most obvious to them, in mid-July and probably on August 1st at the trade deadline. And are those the biggest problems on the entire team? No, but they're the most obvious, just unaddressed holes, and they remain holes, and I think it's hurt them, and I think those are the easiest ways to kind of get the most bang for your buck, I guess, which is to bring in just a quality reliever, some guy who's got 3 years, a good track record, and whether he's an impending free agent or he's got another year, whatever it is, should not break the bank. And to just find a random average-ish guy who can play left field, right field, first base, and is a 270 hitter with 20 homers that you can spot against lefties and he can play every day if you need him to, should not be difficult. Except that was the case in November. It was the case in January. It was the case in March. And they were unwilling or unable to use assets on that. Instead, they kept the bullpen basically intact. They brought back Emilio Pagan instead of replacing him, essentially. Right. And then they kept Kyle Garlick as that right-handed bat, and he's been at AAA for most of the year. So those, to me, are the most obvious, what do they need to do at the deadline? Not because I think those are the biggest headline-grabbing moves, just because those are gaping holes and have been for 6 months.
I guarantee you that as we get into as we do a deeper dive into the relievers, the name Michael Fulmer is going to come up.
He's been good.
In terms of
horrible start, and then
horrible start. Decent work with the Cubs. He's absolutely going to be available on the market. He's a free agent to be. The Twins had him last year. We talked the whole offseason about them signing him, and I wouldn't be shocked if they traded for him again. It's just
they need a Michael Fulmer type. I'm not some huge Michael Fulmer fan, but I saw there's a comedian named Todd Barry who I've seen in person a couple times. And he tells a joke about how he used to be like he was in The Wrestler. He has like a bunch of bit acting parts. And he does commercials sometimes. And he said that one day he showed up for an audition, and the call sheet for the audition that they send out to like agents and reps to get people to come into audition said, we're looking for a Todd Barry type, which is like a short, bald guy who speaks monotonely. And so he said, I showed up, and they looked at me and they said, I don't think you're right for this. And he thought, well, that's about right. And so I'm looking for a Michael Fulmer type. It doesn't need to be Michael Fulmer. It could be Michael Fulmer.
I'm going to be very interested in the Patreon episode where we break down the relievers, because there's going to be a lot of relievers out there.
There always are.
There always are. It feels like, maybe in particular because it feels like there is a somewhat of a dearth of hitters available out there, depending on how some of the teams go and how willing they are to move some of their bigger names.
But yeah, so I mean,
but the relief, I mean, it feels to me like you should be able to fall down and fall into a decent right-handed reliever.
And that doesn't mean those guys are going to thrive. I mean, you're getting like 15, 20 innings of a reliever when you trade for him at the deadline. You're getting not much. I mean, one bad outing wrecks the whole thing. And there's a Sam Dyson you can get. There's a Jorge Lopez you can get, although I would say Lopez was they were shooting higher than I even necessarily think they need to shoot.
Yeah, well, I think that might be one of the when we have the reliever conversation, we're going to talk about that.
I'm thinking more, a Michael Fulmer type or Michael Fulmer, a Sergio Romo type from 3 years ago. Those are the type of, is this guy going to carry the bullpen? Yes. No. Is this guy going to strike fear in the opponent in the ninth inning of a World Series? No. But can this guy pitch the sixth or the seventh inning in a 42 game and you feel okay about it? Yeah.
A lot of the non-competitive teams that you mentioned, the 7 teams that you mentioned,
no matter how bad the team
have a couple of guys like that, right?
Absolutely. Yes, so I guess so we talked to Falvey on Sunday before they gave up 15 runs. It should be noted, and he was answering questions about the draft. And he was answering some injury update stuff about like Polanco.
Started with injury updates, then he talked a little deadline talk, then he talked.
So I'm just pulling a couple bullet points of deadline related stuff because that's what we're focused on here. But the few things he said that I thought were kind of interesting, and he speaks in corporate tongue, so it's you gotta slice and dice it to get meaning. But he said something that we've talked about quite a bit, which is, it's very difficult. Everyone always goes, why don't they just make the trade in June? They know they need a reliever. They know they need. Well, it's pretty tough. You got to pay a real premium, and the number of the supply and demand is all out of whack because most of the teams don't know where they're at now, and they're not really looking to make trades because.
And that's become. He talked a little bit how about that's even become worse than it was because in previous years because of wild card stuff.
Could that lead to more kind of major leaguer for major leaguer trades in that you say, well, we need some bullpen help. You need some outfield help. What if we trade you Joey Gallo or Max Kepler for some random sixth inning reliever or something like that? I think that could potentially be a fit, and that widens the circle of teams that can be both buyers and sellers because it's like need for need, except finding a fit in that regard can often be difficult, obviously. Sure. I mean, the reason prospect for veteran trades work so well is it's like trading draft picks. Everyone just kind of recognizes the value of it. There isn't that much, you can.
Well, both teams also have to believe that they can kind of turn around the guy that they're getting too. Like that, the other team has to be like, well, yeah, but Max Kepler's going to be better for us than he's been for you, and we have to be like, they're not giving us their second best reliever. They're giving us their fifth best reliever.
They're giving us the Max Kepler of relievers.
Like, he's your fifth best reliever, but we think he's going to be our third best reliever. Like everybody has to put some projection on top of that, and that's a tough thing to do with 2 months left in the season.
I mean, you're getting the Joey Gallo or the Max Kepler relievers. That's not the most appealing. But he made it very clear that he views the Twins as buyers and not sellers.
Yes.
Although those lines, like I just said, can blur a little bit. And then, I thought the one quote of his that got people kind of worked up was when he said a couple different times, we need to improve offensively, But the biggest improvement there is going to come from, and we were standing outside the clubhouse. The guy he pointed to the clubhouse.
You're not going to see
the guys
major,
in that room
right.
getting better, and people took that to mean I don't think we need to make any changes. What he meant, and I sort of agree with this, and we've talked about this a lot, which is if Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton or Jorge Polanco and on and on, the veteran core guys of this lineup, Jose Miranda, if you want to toss him in there, Kepler if he sticks
Joey
around,
Gallo,
all this stuff. If those guys are just going to continue to not produce, bringing in one bat isn't going to do anything because those guys have a bigger impact than collectively and maybe individually than anybody we're going to bring in. Now, I would argue that any improvement is still improvement.
Sure.
Even if those 5 or 6 guys are going to continue to be bad, bringing in one guy who might not be bad can still
and there can be a cascade effect towards a positive direction where they start to build off something like that. We saw that. For those of you that are really old and watched Twins games 20 years ago, the 2003 acquisition of Shannon Stewart. Shannon Stewart was very good. He had 350 or something over the last 2 months. But suddenly the entire lineup was better because Shannon Stewart was atop the lineup, being getting on base on a regular basis.
I would say the entire lineup was better, and Shannon Stewart.
Well, that's true.
That, not because.
Well, maybe not.
Right, but yes, who cares?
Yeah, right. I don't. Listen, I don't have to necessarily analytically find it. I find a special sauce. I'm going to eat the special sauce. That's it. That's the way it's going to work.
Eating the special sauce. There's might be the title. If they win a playoff game, will you eat the special sauce?
I eat special sauce all the time. I love Big Macs.
Like there was in Succession in the last episode. They were in a kitchen, like the 3 siblings, and they just took a blender, and the one guy agreed to eat whatever they made, so they put just all kinds of stuff in this, eggs, peppers, who knows, and they blended it up.
Yeah.
And I forget what they called it, but it was something funny. And he took like a sip, and he was like, "Oh my god!" So I'm just imagining I get to make the sauce.
If they win the playoff series, not a game.
Okay.
We can talk about eating a special sauce.
Okay. Well, this is exciting now. Now these are stakes. Now they need to go out and make big trades, mortgage the farm system. So those are the things that Falvey said. I don't disagree with anything he said. I mean, he didn't say much, so there isn't that much to really go, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. So kind of using that as a jumping off point, is this team worth investing in? Hopefully I laid out a relatively compelling reason for yes, even if you don't think much of this team, which I don't as currently constructed.
Right, yes.
My point is, it's not. You don't have to be great to win this division, and you then with what you're handed in terms of a playoff matchup and a home field, you don't have to be great to win that, or at least win a game.
Yes.
That's worth fighting for. And then to your point, there's nothing that says that the team you put out there on the field for Game 1 of the playoffs has to bear any significant resemblance to the team it's been in April, May, June, July, August, even in September. Obviously you're not going to overhaul the entire roster. But what I mean is, if a couple of guys start hitting, like you said, and they call up Wallner and he starts mashing, and they go trade for a right-handed bat and he's batting 5th, and Game 1 of the playoffs, you're starting, Sonny Gray, Pablo Lopez at home against a not exceptional team by definition. And you look at the lineup and you go, all right, well, they got Correa. He's had a good second half. Right. Buxton's been healthy. Wallner's mashing. The guy they added's hitting 285 with 10 homers or something like that. Right. Because it looks bad now, makes it likely that it will continue to look bad because, that's just how things work. But there's nothing that says, the lineup you're looking at for Game 1 of a playoff series, it's not any worse because they stunk in July. Right. Do you know what I mean? Right. Yeah. Like it's whatever you roll out there for that game is what you're putting out there. The past doesn't really matter that much. And so that's why I think it's worth investing in. It's worth making changes no matter how marginal they may seem. And it's worth trying to push and put out a product or a roster that gives you your best shot, even though it's been ugly up until that.
I'll take it a step further. I mean, one of the things that we talked about, we've talked about a lot is, and one of the things that one of the TikToks I did was, it's bad enough where the Twins offense is. What's really depressing about the Twins offense is it doesn't seem to be trending in an upward direction whatsoever. There's no sign that it's trending upward. Well, here's the thing. If you are the front office and you're looking at the coaching staff and you're looking at the players and you're saying, you have to get better. You have to figure something out. You have to make some changes.
Right.
And you're going to say, but not us.
Yeah, we don't have
to add anybody
to
this thing.
That's my point of frustration at this point.
Well, I mean, that's a point of frustration in terms of how they're managing the current roster, for sure, right? But and maybe managing the coaching staff as well.
Right.
But you certainly can't say all that and say, yeah, but we're not really adding anybody.
Right. I agree.
So
even if it's just kind of for show,
right?
You need to at least provide some evidence that
if your point is what you're saying is we need to see an upward trend between now and September to really have. If we see it's possible to see an upward trend from now through September, which makes the team that we have in October be a different team than we are seeing now.
Right.
But sooner or later, you've got to reverse the trend and actually get an upward trend. And that takes all hands on deck, including the people who are making the trades.
Well, and I guess within that, I would say, regardless of what happens with the 13 hitters currently on the team, whether they do trend upward, as the Twins hope, or they trend downward or stay the same, you're going to be better off by having a bat added to that. Like, if you make the playoffs and none of these guys have caught fire in the second half, you're still going to be better off for having added a decent right-handed hitter. And if they have caught fire in the second half, if Correa's on fire and Buxton's on fire and they're starting to hit, well, then that's just icing on the cake then. Maybe you've built a really good offense at that point. There's no real downside to me other than, you're giving up prospect capital and you got to be careful there. But, okay, so I have a few other points. So just, I don't know.
Falvey?
No. The Falvey stuff wasn't that interesting. Okay. But so we mentioned this, but they got the hardest part under control. The hardest and the hardest to fill and most expensive to acquire part, certainly at midseason, but really any time of year, is frontline starting pitchers. And they got 4 of them. And they might have 5 of them. They certainly have 4 of them in terms of how they perform this season.
Although this year at the trade deadline, there's probably more starting pitching available than I've seen in terms of some of the.
But it's still not going to be cheap.
Deadlines.
It's never going to be cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's so true. In turn, like you look at their farm system, or even trading major leaguers like a Kepler or Miranda or something like that. You only have so many bullets, right? And so not having to spend those bullets on a Tyler Mahle or even even somebody less touted than that at the time helps you. It conserves those bullets in general, but it allows you then to spend them on a hitter or spend them on a reliever. And so I think not only do they have the hardest and most expensive to get things under control, which is a rotation, but specifically having 3 or 4 playoff caliber starters.
Right.
You also have Duran as your closer. You have Griffin Jacks and potentially Brock Stewart late in the game. Now, Brock Stewart's injury is part of the reason why I think they need to acquire another reliever.
Sure.
But what I mean is, in the playoffs, you don't need 13 pitchers. You don't even really need 10 pitchers. And so the notion of just quality depth or above average or even average guys, the kind of spectrum of importance changes completely. In the playoffs, you need basically 3.5 starters. I mean, look, we talked about how the first round is a best of 3. We need 3 starters for that.
Yes.
And then you can deal with it later.
That's right.
Well, they have that.
Yes.
I mean, they certainly have 3 starters. And to play a 3-game series at home, and I'm assuming there won't be any days off. It'll just be straight 3 games.
Usually is.
You probably are going to need 3 or 4 relievers that you can count on. Yeah. Well, they have minimally 2 in Duran and Jacks. I think Stewart, if healthy, certainly looks the part. Caleb Thielbar, if healthy, potentially looks the part. But because those latter two, both have injury concerns and are on the IL right now, I think adding one more name to that list. But,
I'm with you 100%.
But from a pitching standpoint, I'm not saying this is the perfect pitching staff. I'm not saying they're bound to win, a bunch of 2-1 games and make a playoff run. But I'm saying you have 90% of a playoff caliber or a title caliber pitching staff. You have 4 legit starters. You have between 3 and 4 legit relievers, and adding one more reliever to that mix shouldn't be that expensive. Yeah. So I feel good about that part. I mean, obviously, look, would you like to have Prime Johan atop the rotation instead of Sonny Gray or Pablo Lopez or something like that? Well, yeah, but playoff caliber starters to me is something they have very clearly been lacking. Too often over the last 20 years, the guy taking the mound in the first inning for them, you go, why is this guy starting a playoff game? And they don't have anybody. That's not going to be the case this year, assuming relative health.
You can argue even if they've got a quick turnaround into round 2.
Right.
they've got somebody. They've got a 4th guy that they can probably rely on to start game 1.
And so the easy part, relatively speaking, should be just go add a bat somewhere. But what complicates it a little bit, and what we'll get into here now, is that is simple in the sense that you just need competent, slightly above average or even average major league hitters. You just need some corner bats who can hit 270 with 20 homers. Not in the second half, but I mean, like, that's their
I get
season
it.
line.
Yeah, right.
Except, where do you need them? Where would they slot in? Makes it a little trickier than just throw a dart, hit a guy, and trade for him.
A little bit, but not much. Before we dive into that, let's cover our last two sponsors. Game Time app. Twins coming back to town here in a week, and you're going to want to be able to go get your tickets on the Game Time app. I think I went out there last one and found $4 tickets. Now there's fees on top of that, but I have gotten tickets on my way while I'm walking to the game. I've gotten tickets. I have been sitting at Brixworth and on the patio with two friends and realized we only had 2 tickets for the 3 of us. And I go out there and I download the Game Time. I've got the Game Time app. I download a ticket, and my friend's got a ticket to the game. We all walk into the game. It's all $15-$20. And the best part about it is for you guys, that $15 or $20 ticket price can be absolutely free.
Yeah, so Game Time specialty is hard to find and or last minute tickets, like John just said. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, you create an account, and then when you check out, you use the code Gleeman, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, just create an account on the Game Time app, redeem the code Gleeman for $20 off. Download Game Time today, last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
And finally, Harry's Razors. We've been Harry's Razors. I've been a Harry's Razors fan now for 10, 15 years. I honestly still feel like I'm learning best how to use a razor as good as Harry's. I've gotten to the point now where one of the things that when you get the package, the great package that they send, they also have like a little instruction book on sort of shaving. One of the things they mention is, because our razors are so sharp and because you are replacing them all the time, you don't have to be afraid to shave against the grain. So I shave once with a grain, and then I shave once against the grain. Now I've gotten to the point now, even after I shave against the grain, I'll feel my face a little bit, and if I feel just a little spot there, I'll go back and touch it up a little bit. Because the razor is so...
Right.
Listen, the reason you don't shave against the grain with most razors is because that razor got old in a hurry.
And it's a pain in the ass to replace it.
Yeah, either it's not a great razor,
right,
like Harry's are, or it's a pain in the butt to replace it. And so
this couldn't be easier to replace it. You just go to harrys.com. They'll ship it to you whenever you need it.
It's $2 a razor, 5 blades, unbelievable.
Here's what they're offering, which is a craft handle starter set.
Yes.
And so what that has,
which is sweet.
It's the sleekest handle yet with their craft handle starter set. It includes the craft handle blade, 5-blade German-engineered razor cartridge, shaving gel, and a travel cover. Plus, like you said, you can schedule replacement blade delivery whenever you need them. Refills are as low as $2.
Right.
That's a $17 value, that starter set, and you can get it to try it for just $10. You go to harrys.com/Gleeman. That's harrys.com/Gleeman, HARRYS, harrys.com/Gleeman.
I got one. I use it. I use the craft one now at home, and I put my old one into my travel case. So,
okay. Let's see. So I think if you have a top 3 pitching staff, the goal should be, at bare minimum, how do we build an average lineup?
Yeah.
That's not ideal. You'd love to have a top 3 lineup.
And here's the truth. They're 20th overall or something like that in Major League Baseball sort of runs per game. So
right. The problem has been more when I said
it's
earlier,
been about the consistency of it.
When I said earlier they're a bottom 5 lineup,
right.
They're not season long, just overall totals a bottom 5 lineup, but the distribution of their runs has been a bottom 5 lineup, which we've talked endlessly about.
Which kind of brings us back boom or bust. It brings us again to sort of it's not necessarily that you need to just throw more big bats at it. It's just a matter of getting enough right pieces in place such that you're a little bit more consistent. You're a little bit better. Like you want to go from 20th to 15th, right? And you're a lot more consistent. So.
Okay. So where do they need to upgrade, or what are the openings, or I guess what are the most seamless spots that you could do it without displacing someone who's actually pretty good or part of your long-term plan? Because, if you're bringing in an average hitter, but you're displacing someone who could probably be projected to be an average hitter, you're not really moving the needle that much, particularly if that guy's part of your future. But so to me, I mean, you're not bringing in a shortstop, obviously,
right.
Even though Correa, I mean, first of all, as frustrating and mediocre as Correa has been, finding a better shortstop is impossible, obviously. You're not going to bring in a catcher.
No.
Because, A, you haven't even decided to really bench Vasquez yet and play Jeffers.
Yeah.
It's similar to the outfield situation that we talked about earlier.
Still about a 50-50 split on those two, right?
Okay, that's a change from...
It's probably time to go 60-40,
right,
just FYI, right?
But, I mean, they have a lot of money invested in their two catchers,
Right.
one of whom is playing really well in Jeffers, one of whom is signed to a 3-year, $30 million deal. They're not going to bring in a catcher. And also, there's aside from frontline starting pitching,
This is the bigger point.
the most expensive and hardest to find,
Right.
most limited supply of anything you could ever try to get is a starting catcher.
Good luck finding a great hit.
Right.
There isn't a Mike Piazza out there right now. Right.
Unless you want to try to talk Mauer out of retirement or something like that. Tim Laudner's around if you want to bring him in.
He is around.
Yeah, unfortunately. Hi, Tim.
Oh, come on.
Just kidding. Sort of.
Yeah, so not
so
shortstop,
those are two
not
covered.
catcher, right?
Okay. Now, second base.
I would say second base you don't need either.
Right, because either Jorge Polanco is going to be back, which Falvey said he's going to rehab. Basically, he's going to start a rehab basically like now, assuming the last few days went reasonably well.
Yeah.
Now, they're not going to bring him back in 3 days. It's probably going to be 2 weeks or something like that. But certainly by the trade deadline, you would hope to have Jorge Polanco back in your lineup and at least have a sense that you can count on him. And if not, if you can't count on him by that point, you have Ed Julian, who defensively has been rough, but offensively has been their best hitter, basically. So second base, I don't know that you really need to do anything at second base. Second base is also, not quite to the level of center field or catcher. It's going to be really hard to find and very expensive to find a good hitting second baseman at the deadline anyway. And so I think you have to, I'm not that confident in Polanco's health. I'm certainly not a big believer in Julian's defense, but I think that's one of the spots where you have to just live with what you have in terms of resource allocation. Yeah. Like you can't, it
would be hard to bring in somebody that can only play second base.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? Which isn't, there aren't a lot of players like that, but you don't want to be shutting out the other two options. You'd have to have somebody really exceptional.
Now, the one that then gets tricky is DH.
Yes, it is.
Because DH is the spot where you literally just say, can he hit? Right. Yes. Except you have Buxton at DH.
Right.
And, he hasn't hit. But are you going to acquire a DH and just bench Buxton or put him on the IL? I mean, if you bench Buxton, you have to put him on the IL. Right. He can't just be a pinch hitter at that point, and he's not playing the outfield. So I think, unfortunately, that's the easiest slot to fill at the deadline because you're just wide open in terms of possibilities. Any bat. It can be a shortstop, it can be a catcher, it can be a left fielder, it can be a guy who literally can barely run to first base. But if he can hit, you put him at DH. But I think having Buxton kind of closes that off. And look, as we said earlier, if Buxton's not going to hit, they're going to be in trouble anyway. So I almost feel like you're banking on Buxton hitting, being healthy. Now, if you are truly not a believer in that, then maybe you try to bring in a DH, except the majority of the guys that you would bring in at DH can at least play first base, can at least play left field, right field. Yeah. And so it would kind of check both boxes anyway.
It cuts off. The DH spot for now is spoken for. Right, is what I would say. If you're going to bring in somebody, odds are they can play some other position.
But it cuts off the Jim Thomeys, the Nelson Cruzes, the true end of the line. David Ortiz at the end with the red, like guys who are just hitters at this point. It cuts those.
What I would say about almost all of these positions that you're kind of going through is what we're really kind of talking about is what is the threshold offensively that they have to meet. Right, we're kind of starting with you have to be an unbelievable offensive catcher for us to be able to pull you in here. You have to be an unbelievable DH to be replacing Buxton. We're going to be getting to some position, and a second base would be another one. We're not saying absolutely don't consider a second baseman, but it's got to be an unbelievable performer, like a true all-star type performer. Yes. We're going to find positions a little bit at different spots where that is not the bar.
Right. Well, and the last thing I would say about the DH spot, and I know there are people listening to this and wanting to push aside Buxton, and I get that, but I don't think they're going to do that. And I think it's reasonable to expect Buxton to perform better, obviously down the stretch if healthy. But within that, even if he doesn't, guys like Wallner and Larnach can be DHs. Guys like Julian, by the way, could be a fantastic DH if Polanco is able to play second base. Yes. And so you have internal options there that can fit that same description or cover that same need if you do decide Buxton's just not able to do it. Okay, so
and then there's one more tricky one we're going to talk about.
Let's see, one more tricky one.
I think.
What?
Third base.
Okay, this is so what makes third base tricky, in my mind at least, is the fact that you're waiting for Royce Lewis to return from what will be a 6-week plus oblique injury, which puts him in late August, early September, essentially. So you're going to have to make that decision on what you want to do at third base long before you have any real sense of when or if he'll be ready.
Yep.
Now, beyond that, Royce Lewis played really well for 26 games. But are we sure how good Royce Lewis actually is as an everyday third baseman, offensively or defensively? Now, I do think you kind of have to just live with that if you think he's going to be healthy. The problem is you just don't have time to let that process fully play out. I mean, if the trade deadline was September 1st instead of August 1st, you'd have a much better idea of what can we count on or not from Royce Lewis. Now, there are other options internally at third base other than Royce Lewis. We're seeing them now. Jose Miranda, Willie Castro, Kyle Farmer. Now, can you piece together third base there in place of Lewis? Wait for Lewis to come back in late August, let's say, and then worst case, if he's not able to come back, if he restrains his oblique or whatever, can you live with that trio of guys at third base? I don't know that you really can.
Yeah, I'm not ruling third base out, right? But and in terms of, again, sort of the hierarchy of what offensive bar they need to clear. Third base is certainly lower than all the other positions that we have sort of talked about at this point.
And here's the truth. If you went out and traded for, I don't know, Matt Chapman or something like that, like a legit stud third baseman, and Royce Lewis does come back in August or is really good in September, ready to go in September, he can play some second base. He can play some shortstop. Maybe you talk him into playing some outfield. He, by the way, could be a DH a little bit. There are at least ways to find work for him in the lineup. And here's the other truth. If you go out and trade for Matt Chapman or some other really good third baseman and Royce Lewis comes back and you just find yourselves in September and you're going, we just can't find room for Royce Lewis. That's a shame for Royce Lewis, and it's not ideal, but that probably means you're hitting pretty well as a lineup.
But on the other hand, if you're talking about a more mediocre third baseman who's going to be a free agent at the end of the year, it isn't necessarily going to cost you too much because they're not tearing it up, but they're a competent third baseman. There was at least one on the list that I'm thinking of that I can't think of right now.
We'll get into on the Patreon.
That I thought that's exactly right. Like almost a slight upgrade from Gio Urshela, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? You're not pushing. I don't know that you're pushing aside your plans too much for that, or you're certainly at least not giving up a lot.
I think it's tricky, but I would view it as like you're really trying to upgrade Miranda, Farmer, and Castro with a trade, not trying to upgrade Royce Lewis, because finding somebody better than Royce Lewis is going to be tricky, and it's going to be expensive, and B, you're not even really sure if it's going to be a need, because if Royce Lewis comes back, then why did you need to upgrade from Royce Lewis? And so you're kind of planning for the month between the deadline and September 1st when you may be without Royce Lewis, and then you're putting in place a contingency if Lewis doesn't come back or struggles when he comes back and all that. Because I don't know that, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't know that you can play Jose Miranda as your everyday third baseman at this point. I don't think you can live with it offensively or defensively at this point. Does that change at some point in the future? Maybe.
He's got a week to try and show you that that's different, but
he doesn't look different than he did when they sent him down, unfortunately. And he himself could be a potential trade candidate if there are teams that believe in him. But yes, third base I think is the first kind of, that's a spot you could realistically try to target something at. But so then beyond that though, center field is a spot that you could absolutely try to target. Michael Taylor hasn't done a bad job. He's just in a role that he's ill-suited for, which is playing every day against right-handers and left-handers. Michael Taylor has been really good defensively. He's been very good stealing bases. He's been really good at squeeze bunting and some of the small things that adds to this team at the bottom of the lineup. And he's popped 10 homers or something. But he should not be playing every day against right-handed pitching. And unfortunately, they've needed him to do that. And so you look at his overall numbers, and he's got 650 OPS or whatever. That's absolutely a spot you could upgrade. But finding even an average all-around center fielder at the trade deadline is going to be difficult because there aren't that many of those guys, and most of those guys are playing for good teams. And then B, if you do identify someone like that, they're going to be really expensive to pry loose from these teams.
It's similar to the catcher situation, right? If you're going to find a center fielder who really listen, your primary goal here isn't to find a good center fielder. It's to find a some offense, right? And it's hard to find a center fielder that adds a lot of offense. Now, there turns out there is one on this particular trade market that looks like a pretty good fit, but he's also going to be real expensive.
Right. So third base and center field, I kind of view a little bit similarly, where it's like you dig around, make calls, assess the market, try to push on some of this stuff, but it's not.
I would say the one place I would, and I haven't found this player really, but a mediocre center fielder that's left-handed might make sense.
Right, I guess, yeah.
Somebody that you're putting Taylor back into a platoon
but
role,
even
which is where he was.
That's a pretty good player because that guy's playing 2/3 of the time.
Could be. Yep.
I mean, that's the strong side of a platoon.
Listen, I just said I haven't actually found this guy on the trade market, but that's the guy. I am looking for that guy.
But if a Stork drops him on a bad team, John's ready to pounce.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
This guy was born yesterday. He hits left-handed.
The guy I have in mind is a really good left-handed hitter.
So what does that leave? That leaves the 2 corner outfield spots and to some extent first base in the sense that you could shift Alex Kirilloff to the corner outfield. Now, first base gets tricky, though, because Donovan Solano has also been part of the first base mix,
true.
And he's been damn near their best player.
It's true.
You could play Donovan Solano at third base a little bit if you want to take that hit defensively. I actually think you might see a little bit more of that if
We've
sour
already
on
seen a little bit
Miranda.
of it, yeah.
For that matter, you could play Solano at second base, too, a little bit, which he's actually played quite a bit in the past. And so that's what you're set with in terms of what's the most seamless way on both fronts. What's the easiest way to make an upgrade, but also the most cost-effective way where you don't have to shed your entire prospect capital. And it's either left field, right field, or first base. I'm going to lump all those together because there's some, Gallo can play all those.
Corner, outfield, and first base. Yep.
And so the good news is that those are also happen to be the most plentiful spots for offense.
Other than DH.
Right, other than DH in all of baseball. There are always going to be guys who fit that description. Now, you're slicing that group thinner because you're really looking for a right-handed bat or a switch hitter.
Probably.
Because you have who do we just name? Kirilloff, Gallo, Kepler, Wallner, Larnach are all left-handed hitters. So
I would be choosing unless it was a really exceptional bat.
Sure.
I would be choosing a right-handed over
Yes, I agree. Sure. And so we'll get in on Monday on the Patreon. We'll go through the actual names from the actual teams, what we think it would cost, whether they're upgrades, what their contract situation, impending free agents versus under team control, all that stuff. But I think, on whatever whiteboard they got in whatever room at Target Field where they're mapping this thing out, and they are doing that, it's got to be primarily right-handed hitting corner outfielders, maybe some third base, center field guys mixed in there.
Sure.
But I actually sort of view that theoretically as a good thing because it's not difficult to identify. It's relatively plentiful. It doesn't need to be super costly in terms of, prospect capital or whatever to acquire.
Yep.
And
there are guys like that on the market every year.
Yes.
And there are guys on the market like that this year.
Right. What gives me pause and
they don't have to be superstars.
Well, right. I mean, just literally anybody who's got a little bit of pop, controls the strike zone, and can play not a horrible defense and is right-handed. What gives me pause before I'm like, okay, they're in a really good situation here is they've just shown no willingness to move on from the 2 guys they have in those spots. They've shown no willingness to give a chance to Wallner specifically, and throughout the offseason, this was a clear need, and they showed absolutely no willingness to just go out and sign an Adam Duvall or a Trey Mancini or just some random guy to a 1-year, $5 million deal to upgrade from Kyle Farmer. Now, instead, they ended up not really even using Kyle Farmer, so they just kind of went without. So against lefties, you've seen Gallo out there, you've seen Kirilloff out there, you've seen Kepler out there, which just weakens the lineup. So on one hand,
Willie Castro.
A
lot of Willie Castro.
I mean, look, God love Willie Castro. He's a real nice 13th guy to have, but you should not be playing Willie Castro every day at this point. And he's got the 6th most plate appearances on the team, and that's after barely playing in April, by the way.
Right.
He's batting 5th against righties. He's playing left field most days. Like, you're stretching and
at some point you have to go, when are we? Is this this isn't the right lineup, right?
I mean, and we're seeing that a little bit with Farmer and with Taylor and Castro, which is these are solid depth guys, which is what they were brought in, by the way, to do. They were not. None of those 3 guys were brought in to get 550 plate appearances. And when you use them in a role that is more of a regular, everyday role, the flaws become more apparent. You aren't able to just spot them in the best possible matchup.
I should also say the guys that are on the market like this are not going to necessarily get y'all excited. Right, they got a lot of these corner outfield names that we're going to be talking about. I'll go a step further. I think a lot of these guys who are that we're going to end up talking about as a corner outfielder, especially right-handed hitters, etc., are guys that were they on the free agent market. I'm not sure they would have been viewed as better than or worse than Joey Gallo. I'm not sure they would have gotten a better contract than Joey Gallo got
stylistically
3, 4, 5 months ago, right?
It's better for the Twins.
At least style. I mean, first of all, they're performing and Gallo isn't. They're performing and Kepler isn't. Like, we're not picking guys who suck or having a bad year right now. We're picking guys who are having a pretty good year. Now, that doesn't necessarily guarantee they're going to have a good August and September.
No, but also think
so
of when they did sign Gallo, what was the number one thing that we said, which is as a pure value proposition, it makes some sense.
Right.
$11 million to bank on a Joey Gallo bounce back is not crazy. Now, it turns out I probably wouldn't have done that if I could redo it, but it's not crazy.
Right, yes.
But at the time, we were like, what do they need another left-handed hitting corner outfielder for?
Well, they're going to be trading Max Kepler. That was the thing.
Yeah. They ended up trading Luis Ariz, and they still didn't really need him because, but if you had found a right-handed hitting Joey Gallo at that point, which is actually less valuable just sort of theoretically.
Right. Yes, right. Because you know, the strong side of the platoon.
Right.
Yeah, right.
But it's a much better fit for the actual roster itself because it's not duplicating what you have in Kepler and at the time Ariz and Wallner and Larnach and Kirilloff and on and on. And so to your point, the guy they might get as a right-handed hitting corner outfielder, you're going to go, well, that guy's not even necessarily better than Kepler or
exactly
Wallner or Larnach. Yes, but he's presumably having a decent first half or had a decent first half and presumably can hit left-handed pitching, which has been their number one weakness now for multiple years and has really come to a head this year.
And also, in short series, something that can just kill you.
Well, yeah.
Right? You get to the postseason. Like, that is one of the things like, Jesus, are we really going to roll into the postseason as the 30th hitting versus left-handed pitching? What do you think we're going to see in the postseason?
Yeah, although,
what do you think that roster is going to be loaded with?
I was looking at some of the potential third wildcard teams.
Fair. Yeah, okay.
And there are going to be scenarios where that team just can't hurt you with left-handed pitching.
Because they don't have it. Right.
But there's a couple of teams where you're going to see 2 lefties in 3 games.
Just so we're clear. They can call up a dude from AAA that's fairly mediocre and hurt us.
Start them in a playoff series. I mean, you would almost want them to do that.
That would be interesting. Yeah, but that would be interesting.
So,
just to polish on your point. So the good news is, the bad news is, we're going to be running through some names of corner outfielders that we think could help the Twins and are probably going to be realistic targets. And you're going to hear these names and not be excited about them. The good news is, they're available. They're not going to cost a lot, and they could actually help this team. Right. So,
yeah, and I think.
But
I'm not against the idea of them being aggressive for a second straight trade deadline. I'm not against the idea of them trying to acquire legitimate stars.
Right.
I just think that's not really something that's available in the bullpen.
Right.
And it's available.
And it hasn't worked out particularly well when they've shot for that.
But also, it's available in the sense that there will be a handful of star caliber hitters probably moved. And, if the Cardinals are open for business, they got Goldschmidt, Arenado, and some other guys.
Well, we should talk about
that fit that description. Right, yes. We're going to talk about that in a second, which teams are actually going to be moving. But for the most part, because you need a corner outfielder, a first baseman, maybe a third baseman, maybe a center fielder, but you're ruling out the other spots. Right. Like some of those star caliber guys that are available just don't help you enough or aren't clear enough upgrades that you want to pay a premium to get them. Yeah. And so that eliminates a little bit too. And so I'm not against the idea of them pushing more chips into the middle. If you're going to be a Bear, be a Grizzly, no half measures, whatever cliche you want to put in there. I mean, you don't sign Carlos Correa and do trades to build up this pitching staff and then go, we don't want to really invest much more at the deadline. Yep. I'm not saying that isn't what they should do. They should absolutely call on Goldschmidt and Arenado and similar guys like that, true middle-of-the-order impact guys. Right. Absolutely.
Yes, 100%.
But I don't know that that's needed necessarily. It would be great, but from a cost standpoint,
from a cost-effectiveness standpoint.
Right. I mean, if you're sitting here saying go trade for Goldschmidt, You better be ready to trade Brooks Lee.
Yeah,
You
right.
better be ready
That's
to
right.
trade Emmanuel Rodriguez. You better be ready to trade Wallner and. Like, you
Yes,
better be
right.
ready to trade legit dudes that you've been thinking about joining this lineup in the future. Because you're not going to get Paul Goldschmidt, even if we assume he's going to waive his no trade. I think
Right.
they both have no trade. So
They
it might
both-
just
they
be
both have no
It might
trades.
be a moot point anyway.
Right.
But you're not going to get a player like that for, your 6th, 8th, and 12th best prospect. You're going to have to give up a premium. And so I think weighing that against the idea of, well, couldn't they just kind of give up their 9th best prospect and get a pretty good outfielder and then give up their 12th best prospect and get a Michael Fulmer type for the bullpen? And wouldn't they be in relatively good shape at that point? I think that is the path that is most likely.
Yes.
And the path I would probably pursue the most. But I do think it's worth still trying to push
course.
and be aggressive.
Of course.
And I would expect them to do that. I don't know that it fits. I don't know that it's lined up as well for that approach as it was last year. In terms of what's available.
Yeah, I think
because
that's right. I
last
think
year it
that's right.
was, we
Yep.
need pitching help. We clearly need pitching help.
Right. And you're going to have to pay for that either way.
Right. And
So
there were
go get it.
several,
Right.
Frankie Montas, Tyler Mahle. Now, they all got hurt, and every trade was terrible.
Right.
But it was at least connecting the dots between that was a little bit easier than it
The
is
one
now.
difference I would say, one of the pieces I would say is different between this year and next year, last year, is last year it was clear that that they were also looking forward to this year, right? That the trades they were making. I mean, yeah, they did some of the stuff on the side, like let's get Fulmer and let's get
but the reason
and
they
let's get the
valued-
backup catcher. I forget his name. Is it Leon, right? Sandy
But the
Leon.
reason they valued Jorge Lopez
Right.
was because he had 3 years of team
and the
control.
reason they Mahle was the same thing.
Correct.
I don't think that is a focus
but
for
it's
this
always-
team going
it's always
forward.
a focus for
I don't know that it's going to be for. I would say I think they've got enough faith in enough of the people in this lineup that they don't want to be committing to a.
I just think they
and a
always
half kind of
value
thing.
that.
Listen, I'm not saying they're going to rule out Paul Goldschmidt because he's under contract for 2024. Don't
but
get me wrong.
I think
right?
they always look first to controllable guys because they place a huge emphasis on that, and they're not alone with that, obviously. But almost any time Falvey talks about, at the beginning of off seasons or whatever, about what their plan is, it's always, I don't think. Yes, I mean, can you say?
I think there's a lot. I think there's less focus. I think there should be less focus.
But here's
on
what
it
I'll
this year.
say to that: a right-handed hitting outfielder, won't that be a need next year? Why would that not
Yeah,
be a
that's
need
fair.
next year?
Fair.
Like their system does not really have that.
That's true.
I mean,
That's true.
right?
Yeah,
I mean,
for a
their
right-handed
system
outfielder,
has
you're right.
lefties.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And even
You can
going
say that. You can
forward,
say that for first base, really, too.
even going forward, Emmanuel Rodriguez, lefty. Walker Jenkins, lefty.
Right.
Like the Brooks Lee, switch hitter, but he's an infielder, obviously. Okay, let's talk about teams now.
Yeah.
We'll know more obviously 2 weeks from now because some team that's on the fence is going to go 5-10,
Yes.
and another team that's on the fence is going to go 10-5, and that's going to push them from the middle to one side of it or whatever. But to me, I looked at Fangraphs as of this morning, the playoff odds, and to me, obviously this is subjective because some GMs want to hold on to a 5% chance, and some GMs don't care about a 30% chance.
Right.
But if you're under 20% or under, if you're less than a quarter of the chance to just make the playoffs, and a
Okay.
lot of that is wild card for these teams.
Sure.
That to me would seemingly be a for sure seller at this stage.
All right.
And so here are the teams. There are 11 of
Okay.
these teams. 10.
I'm guessing a couple of these I put in more the middle round.
Right.
But keep going. Let's see what you got.
Royals,
Sure.
Athletics,
Right.
White Sox,
Right.
Tigers,
Yep.
Angels, Rockies, Nationals.
Okay, so Angels you've got. Now I put Angels in the middle right
Angels
now.
aren't doing shit.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know
Angels
they're
are
1-9.
below 500. They just lost Trout for 3 months.
Listen, I'm not saying I don't think they should.
They'll sell.
I think they should sell.
They just might not sell Ohtani because that's going to leave a mark. But I think
It's going to leave a bigger market. They don't sell Ohtani.
Yeah, but I'm not saying logically.
So you
I'm
don't
just
have Seattle in that one. You got Seattle in sort of the middle ground. Probably.
Seattle's like 40-something%
Yeah.
chance to make the playoffs.
Okay, all right.
But so wait, Royals, Athletic, White Sox, Tigers, Angels, Rockies, Nationals, Pirates, Cubs. I think all of those teams, in my mind, and at least statistically,
that's exactly
should be
the list I
clear-cut sellers. I will put 2 other teams in there who are below 20% in terms of playoff odds, but they're going to be more stubborn about agreeing with that,
Okay.
which is St. Louis, who we just talked about, And I don't mean this. I think they'll sell, but will they sell Arenado and Goldschmidt?
Well, I want to talk about
is
that.
completely different
Right.
because those guys are signed beyond this year, and they have no trade clauses, and they're MVP caliber. I mean, Goldschmidt literally won the MVP last year, and then the Mets are the other one.
Okay.
The Mets are below 20%.
Yep.
But is Steve Cohen, going to actually sell with the most expensive team in the history of baseball?
Both of those teams I put into the sell category, but I'll tell you, I did. St. Louis has already indicated that yes, they are quote unquote selling,
Right.
But what he really said is we're looking to 2024,
Right, which Goldschmidt and Arenado would be a part of.
exactly. So on the one hand, that's good news for the Twins, I guess, in that a lot of the things that they could be sending back to teams are teams that are players that are, you mentioned Jose Miranda, you mentioned, Brooks Lee. They are players who are. A lot of the Twins' assets for sale are in AAA or have some limited time in the majors, some service time already in the majors. So if you are a team like the Cardinals, or I would suggest also the Mets, who are both like, listen, it's not going to happen this year, but let's make sure any assets we get are, not assets that are low A assets, high A assets. We're interested in guys that are going to help us next year in 2024, whether that including, maybe some pitching assets. The Cardinals are certainly going to be looking for that. Like, how interested are you willing to suggest a Bailey Ober or something like that? Are you willing to give them some cost-controlled youngsters that are replacing all the guys they're going to be losing from their starting rotation this year? That's the good news about that. The bad news is the high-end guys are all under contract for 2024.
Right.
And so as a result...
So why are you trading them?
Yeah, so why? Yeah, like, if the Cardinals are looking to compete in 2024, why are they trading away Goldschmidt? Right? If the Mets are looking to trade to compete in 2024, Alonso is not going to be available. Not that Alonso's necessarily available anyway, but you can see where their higher end guys are almost all under contract. These guys are not all free agents to be. Otherwise, it'd be a no-brainer that they're getting rid of them. Right.
So the next tier, which is like, you're under 50%, but you're above 20%, basically your kind of coin flip range to make the playoffs. I would put the Cardinals and the Mets in that tier just in terms of like functionality of like how they will actually view it, but they're not in that mathematically. Right. The next tier is like the Padres.
Yes. Padres are a major question mark.
Yeah. The Red Sox.
Yep.
The Mariners, who you mentioned. And then here's the funny one, the Guardians. Now, that's not going to help the Twins any in the sense that the Twins aren't going to go out and trade.
I did not put them in that, but I did think a little bit about it.
They don't have any hitting anyway, so that's not going to help. They got bullpen. They certainly got some bullpen. But if the Twins called the Guardians and were like, hey, how about Class A?
Well, and also, the Guardians have shown – I like that you put them in this category in part not because I think they have a chance of being sellers, but because I think they have a chance of trading away some of their assets that might be – valuable to them in August and September because they have shown a willingness to trade away some starting pitching for some hitting.
Right. They've done it almost every year. They traded away Carrasco and Bauer and Clevenger and Kluber and guys who
kind of similar to the Brewers last year when they traded away Hader to kind of we're going to try and find
because of their payroll situation, which maybe this changes with new ownership or whatever, but they're constantly trying to, and this is somewhat familiar to Twins fans, I'm sure, they're constantly trying to both buy and sell. They're trying to keep alive this year's hopes, but also if we can trade Shane Bieber for 3 really good prospects or a bat that can help us.
A year and a half of Bieber left over.
Right.
Yeah, well, maybe.
Can we get full value for him? And that's something like Tampa Bay often does.
Yes.
It's something Cleveland often does. It's something the Twins have potentially done. And so now, is that going to help the Twins in the sense that they might go trade for one of Cleveland's relievers? No, there's a 0% chance of that happening. But is it going to help the Twins in the sense that Cleveland might be worse on August 2nd than they are today because they've traded away Shane Bieber and tried to push some of that value into the future?
Or that, that puts, some of the other relievers might be available to the Twins because some other teams that are willing to pay more for relievers are already getting some of Cleveland's. It just adds to the supply demand of the right side of the supply demand dynamic.
Okay. So that's kind of stage set for the deadline. There's roughly 2 weeks and change. Monday we'll start to kind of on the Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We'll start to kind of look at, okay, they need a right-handed bat. Let's actually get some names here. Okay, they need a reliever.
Yep.
Let's actually get some names here. And then even within that, we can maybe talk about, well, what are they trading in these situations?
Right, yeah, right.
Which major leaguers, which prospects?
What is this going to cost?
What is kind of the pain threshold from a farm system standpoint? Yeah. What is this going to cost? We'll get into that, but I thought it was important to just kind of lay of the land type of thing.
Not to mention, we'll also be covering the Oakland series on Monday morning.
True.
To see and any moves that they make, and maybe they will be making some roster moves based on how things go in Oakland or how some people hit. So you never know.
Draft. We were going to finish with some draft talk.
We'll just start by we talked a half an hour on the Patreon. Yeah. Go check it out.
Just to give you the Cliff's Notes version, the Twins were supposed to pick 13th based on their record last year. But as luck would have it, this was the first ever, the inaugural MLB draft lottery. And the Twins were the biggest beneficiaries of that. They moved up 8 spots, which was the most of any team, from 13th to 5th.
Yep.
And almost immediately, as soon as the college season started, everyone started calling this a 5-player draft.
Right.
Which
5 guys who, first of all, it was an especially deep draft.
Yes.
And second of all, it was those, by a 5-player draft, I mean 5 players that could go number 1 almost any other year.
Right.
Right. So
3 college guys, the 2 LSU guys, which is Paul Skeens, the dominant starter, Dylan Cruz, the Golden Spikes College Player of the Year outfielder, and then Wyatt Langford, a slugging outfielder from Florida who finished runner-up in the College World Series, 2 LSU, and then 2 high school outfielders, Max Clark, who's sort of a toolsy center field type, kind of a leadoff type from Indiana, and then Walker Jenkins, who's your prototypical big, strong, likely kind of prototypical slugging right fielder, left-handed hitter.
Best pure prep hitter in the draft.
Right. Yeah. And so the Twins picked 5th, and initially it was like, well, all they got to do is take whichever guy of those 5 didn't get picked in the top 4.
Right.
Pretty easy. I mean, shit, you don't even have to scout it, really. Just there you go.
Yeah,
Sorry for swearing. I forgot it wasn't the Patreon. Shoot, you don't even have to scout it. But then I think in part because there's a mock draft kind of industry. And I don't personally do mock drafts because I don't claim to know that much about high school players and college players. Right. The Athletic runs it. Baseball America runs a weekly one. Fangraphs, Baseball Prospect, every outlet, ESPN, they're putting out this content one way or the other. And it's boring to just say, week after week, mock draft version 1, 2, 3.0, 4.0, 4.2, whatever, updated this week, 24 hours before the draft, all this stuff, to just go, yeah, there's 5 really good players, so those guys will go in the top 5 in some order, and here's the rest of the draft.
Yeah, the Twins will get whichever one we didn't pick as the top 4.
And so I think you combine that, which is one of your favorite phrases, kind of freezer burn.
Yeah.
You get freezer burn with the storyline or the narrative surrounding this, even though it hasn't changed. And if anything, it's been solidified. The 3 college players could not have had better seasons. And then the 2 high school guys really solidified their status as the cream of the crop. Right. And yet you still had people who were going, well, yeah, but what if the Twins instead didn't just take the straightforward approach?
And the Twins do have a reputation, especially, not necessarily amongst the top picks, but certainly amongst picks 2 through 10 or 3 through 10 of
college players
right.
and college bats, and there was a lot of talk about what their models say and all this stuff. Now, hopefully, if you listen to the Patreon when we kind of previewed the draft about a week and a half ago, you heard us downplay the notion of a Jacob Gonzalez or a Kyle Teal or some of these college
because hitters,
I did put in the legwork and talk to the people in that room, and they said, well, it's not impossible we pass on one of the top 5 guys. This whole notion of we're obsessed with college bats and we just go by our motto and all that is wildly overblown. Right. And it turned out exactly that, which is the top 4 picks were the 2 LSU dudes, the high school outfielder from Indiana, Max Clark, the Florida dude, and then Walker Jenkins was still available. And instead of passing on a guy who a lot of people thought is one of the best high school pure hitters in the last decade, and a guy who would, like you said, go number 1 or certainly be a legit candidate to go number 1 in a lot of previous years' drafts in a normal draft class for some, higher floor, lower ceiling college guy. Yeah. They just took him. Yeah, and afterward, it was very funny talking to Sean Johnson, who's their VP of amateur scouting, who's the person who makes those picks. Right. And he was like, well, yeah, we like Walker Jenkins a lot. We were really happy he was there. We took him. And it's like, but didn't you know there was
and specifically
4,000 mock drafts and the people were casting down, and he was just kind of like, well, yeah, but who cares?
Specifically, that was the rumor kind of going 2 weeks ago, a week ago, was that the Twins would be more likely to take a college player if it's Walker Jenkins that falls to them.
Now, we'll never know what the truth was, but I can tell you they took Walker Jenkins. So, and within that, they were full of praise, but obviously they're going to be full of praise for whoever they picked there. But the one thing he told us, it was like a midnight Zoom after the draft, Sean Johnson, he said, people may have seen, if you were watching the draft, they showed the Twins draft room in like the second round.
Right.
And they were all wearing white visors, which was to pay tribute to Mike Radcliffe, who was first a legendary scout and then became VP of player personnel in later years. He spent like almost 40 years with the Twins. And in the scouting community, he's kind of viewed as like one of the last true.
He's the scout.
The scout. Yes.
That's it.
And he's got his fingerprints all over, Mauer and Morneau, and going back even further than that, obviously. And so Sean Johnson said how great it was to be able to get on the draft and show that tribute and everything. He died in February after from cancer. But then he said, well, one of the last times Mike was out scouting was in August at a all-star high school event, and we were sitting there watching Walker Jenkins. And he was in love with Walker Jenkins. And afterward, he filed one of his last scouting reports that he would ever file. And he gave the highest possible grade to Walker Jenkins, which is an 8 out of 2 to 8 scale, which is potential superstar.
Right.
And, within that was full praise in the write-up. Like, if you can somehow, by the way, they didn't know they were going to pick 5th.
Right.
And at the time they were probably in line to pick about 20th because they faded in September.
No, that's true too.
And so it was like, well, here's a report. This guy's a superstar. I don't know why it's relevant to us, but here you go.
Yes.
And so Sean Johnson said, well, you never want to pick 5th because that means it didn't go well for you the year before. This is one case where,
it did not go well the year before.
But you lucked into 5th.
That's right. Yeah.
And then to have this guy be the last available of what we agreed was a great top 5. And he said I read back. He said, as we were making this pick, I went back and called up that scouting report from August, one of his last scouting reports that Radcliffe, and he said, it was almost, reading it over, it was almost like, hey, man, if I'm not here for this draft, here's who you picked.
This is supernatural.
No, I'm not even a big believer in that stuff in general.
I like Radcliffe looking over that because odds are, wherever he is, he knows even more about Walker Jenkins than he did when he was here.
But it is, in retrospect, funny how much... what's the word? Obfuscation of how much kind of trying to muddy the waters of what if the Twins are kind of weird on this and they don't. No, they took the guy. Yeah. And so I'm going to have Monday my updated midseason top 20 prospects. I think Baseball America put theirs out today. Walker Jenkins is like immediately a top, certainly 50 global prospect, and I think some people will consider him a top 25 global prospect. I think it's debatable, which I'll write about Monday, if he should be immediately considered the Twins' top prospect. It's semantics, obviously, at some point, or I like to wait until a guy debuts at least to kind of get a sense. What if he goes out and hits 150? Then
yes.
But he's one of the better, just at the time of the draft, prospects the Twins have ever drafted. Like, he's not quite at the Mauer level.
Yeah,
but he's
not quite at the Buxton level.
Yeah, but I mean, he's up there. I mean, certainly I would say
Royce
top
Lewis.
10, top 5.
Right,
I mean, he's a better prospect than Royce Lewis for sure. He's a better prospect at the time than Brooks Lee for sure. I mean, he's a legit number 1 pick type of guy. Now, there's a lot of bust potential in any 18-year-old kid.
Sure.
But that's who they ended up.
There's a lot of risk associated.
Yeah.
But a lot of upside.
Right. And so he'll sign for more than $7 million probably, which is the slot amount. I would expect him to sign relatively soon. I think there's
his agent is Scott Boras.
His agent is Scott Boras, who they've certainly dealt with plenty, including on Royce Lee. Yes. I mean, Jesus,
Brooks Lee,
Royce Lewis.
Oh, Royce Lewis
as the number 1 pick. I don't know why I keep doing that, other than I'm stupid. So yeah, that's your draft talk. Now, if you want a lot more about their other picks and kind of how the draft played out, and some fuller quotes from Sean Johnson and some other quotes that I got, and also just more of a scouting report on Walker Jenkins, then you're a perfect candidate to sign up for the Patreon. You're exactly the type of person for whom the Patreon was made. Patreon was made.
It's going to cost you $5 between now and the trade deadline. Give it a pull.
Yes.
Thank you to our sponsors, Harry's and Game Time and Nuts.com and HelloFresh. We will be back on Monday morning with a recap of the Oakland series and then probably more deep dive into trade deadline talk or trade deadline news that comes up.
Yep.
Any other news that comes up. We'll probably be back Wednesday with maybe even more trade deadline talk or maybe a mailbag. We'll see about that.
It'll be trade deadline either way.
It might
I'm going to guess the mailbag questions will be
You're right. Yep.
about that too.
Actually, I'd be kind of interested to see some of the names that people come up with in some of those mailbag questions.
Well, it's going to be like, how do they get Aaron Judge from the Yankees? He's injured. Maybe they could pick him up on the cheap.
How about if we give him a new toe? Would that be enough?
Yeah, well, if the Twins had the ability to fix body parts, I think they wouldn't be in this shape that they're in now.
That is true.
All right, we'll talk to you Monday on the Patreon, or if you're silly enough to not subscribe to the Patreon, we'll talk to you Friday.
Gleeman